I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, Naturopathic Doctor. Okay, here we go. We have had it up to here, right, Erin?
Oh, you got it.
What we've had it up to here with, we haven't quite nailed down, but we've had it up to here with a lot of things. It's funny, I'm joined today by my such good friend and colleague, Dr. Erin Ley. And every time we're about to record a podcast together, we have all these, we circle around these themes. And before we hit record, I said, what's your beef, Erin? What do you want to spend time on? And as you were talking, all I could think of is, we have had it up to here. So we're talking
sick and tired of being sick and tired.
That's right. We're sick. But this podcast today is mostly focused around young people. And that's your passion, Erin. When I think about you and I think about the where you shine is around helping lead younger people through complicated health questions and just the complexity of even nutrition as being one of the things that you're the most passionate about. But I'd love for you to sort of volley up the conversation here and what you wanted us to focus on. And we'll start to dive into it for our listeners who are probably both the young people and those young people's parents. Let's be real, listening to this episode, we would like to be able to support all of you in some better decision making. But what have you had it up to here with, Erin?
Oh, where to begin? I just feel like our young people have been given such a disservice with being exposed to the nonsense online. And I think it's almost predatory what's online for them, especially when it comes to what's presented to them with nutrition and supplements. And I don't think that they have practitioners in their corner that are specifically wanting to work with the young adolescents, 10 to 25 years old. That's who I love to work with. That's who I love to see, because they're just given this complete disservice with nutrition. And then when we look at the research, it's hey, nutrition in adolescence is super important. We know that it's ultra important. They're at an increased need for nutrients. We know that their nutritional status spills over into risk of adult chronic diseases. And yet we're just good luck, right? You need to either be taught by maybe your parents don't really know 100% what's needed in all life stages. Maybe you see your pediatrician once and the conversation is quite short and it's not a lengthy conversation that likely needs to happen with nutrition. And I just feel like it's a group of young people that's left kind of out in the cold.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I like that you use the word predatory. It's way more aggressive than the term. I usually talk about the commodification of whether that's hormonal concerns or some of the traditional women's health complaints, or thinking about adolescent health interests like skin and acne and whatnot. I always think about it as commodification, but I like your term predatory. I think it actually sums it up. It actually sums it up a little bit better.
Right? It's just, I feel sometimes the prey when I'm consuming information online, and I feel as though we have a leg up on it, right? I can easily be that's nonsense, that's crap, that's not true, no. but not everyone has that, right? And I think when you are absorbing that information and you're a young person who maybe has lower self-confidence at that point, or they have even less nutritional knowledge, it's like, yep, I'm gonna buy into it, sure. And it is predatory, and I don't think I'm inflating the word. Like, I actually think it is.
No, it is. I mean, their business
Okay.
model for all of those things has to be, we need people to buy this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it works or not. And I think what's predatory about it is that, it places a lot of, like, I'm going to use the word blame on the individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, for some reason, I'm stuck on the skin thing. I think it's because I have a huge pimple and I can see it in our Zoom
Me
call.
too.
Um,
It's right there.
But I'm like, it's your fault that you have these things. And here we are. Like, this is your greatest worry at this phase of life. And here we are with this solution. And we're gonna target market the shit out of you until you buy it, essentially.
Mhm.
Um, but you've brought up such an interesting point of that disconnect between the research and practice, right? That, like, we actually don't have the systems in place to support either parents or those young people through this incredibly influential stage of life. Or like, hey, here's a 10-year span that sets your stage. Oh, instructions? No, we don't actually have time to give you that. Good luck.
Right? It's like worse than IKEA instructions.
It's just the sad face at the
It's
end,
just
like
it,
this. It's the sad face with the
sorry,
shrug.
right?
Oh, you
Like
didn't
that's
achieve peak bone mass? Uh-oh.
whoops, sorry, like dang, because I do think, and that's what I was like bummed about going through the research. It's like it's really important, nutrition through adolescence. It influences adult health. The end. It's like, where do we go? What do we do? And it's such an important conversation that requires more than, the important appointments that you have with your family doctor, with the pediatrician. You can't sit down for an hour with those practitioners for good reason, right? Like that's not their model, and that's okay. But I think choosing a practitioner who can create a therapeutic bond, that can be that person to be like, hey, let's talk about that TikTok post, right? Like, let's go through it together, because the young person, the 14-year-old, shouldn't have to try to figure out if that's legitimate. The parent shouldn't have to figure out if that's legitimate in terms of nutrition, supplementation, etc. Like, you don't have to do that. And your pediatrician probably doesn't book, you know, hour-long appointments to go through all of that as well, right?
Except the devil is in those details of the way we carry out our health from day to day, right? Like, we think, when we think about our health, we think, and health at that age and stage, we think about like the big scaries, right? Breaking a bone or needing, help for a significant acute disease or illness or what have you. Um, but so much of what sets those young people up for optimal health and well-being as an adult is the minutia, actually. That if we're
Mhm.
only there in those death, those facing down death's door kind of moments and not there in the day to day, we're missing this incredible opportunity to be able to influence how health is changed over time.
Mhm.
Because those TikTok videos, it's funny. We're talking about like the parents were like, it's the ill-informed leading the ill-informed, right? Because it's not that the women that I'm working with, who are the parents of those people, they don't know what to eat either. And they also think that dairy is going to, ruin their lives or kill them if they eat it. And
Mhm.
yet that's who that adolescent is, turning towards for modeling and for advice. We learn nutrition through oral tradition, through modeling from the people above us, and they're just as confused.
Right. And I would say that that might be what some people would consider the worst part of working with this age category is you're almost having like two patients, right? You're having like the young person, and then you're also having their guardians, right? Because as you said, like it's a family effort with nutrition with young people. A lot of my patients who are young people are not living on their own, right? And I think that it's tough because you're also trying to change the family unit as well with nutrition. It's like, well, my mom doesn't keep dairy in the house, or my mom, we're gluten free, dairy free, nightshade free, like all the frees. And so that's hard to navigate that. But I do think that that's where like some of my zone of genius comes in with, I don't want to say negotiating, but like, how can this plan fit in your life, in your family's life? So it's almost like having two patients when you are dealing with adolescents.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because that's one of the reasons I don't work with young people.
Totally.
And it's
It's
funny
a
because
limiting factor,
it
right?
is.
Like it's totally
I did a pediatric rotation when I was in school,
amazing.
which now to reflect on that, I think I've blocked it out. And it's because of it's one of the like that's one of the reasons actually.
Mhm,
It's that it did feel like this big negotiation.
mhm,
Or you had the parent weighing in on a like, well, I've heard, right? Well,
right.
I thought. And it's not that women and adults don't do that in their own care, but it's a different, we seem to have a harder time or a different time making decisions around our kids or young people than we do for ourselves.
Mhm.
Which I'm not sure what that is. I don't know what you like. What do you think about that?
I'm not I'm not sure, right? Like I think that we're of course as parents so like concerned about like our children, but I almost think that when I have those like patients with their parents, if I can give people a reason why we're altering some sort of like nutritional strategy or using a supplement, if that's what we're talking about, if I can position it in terms of our goals, then we're more likely to do it and stick to it. And I don't think we need to work like that differently with adolescents and young people than we do with adults, right? Like if I just always picture my mom telling me, you have to eat breakfast, you have to eat breakfast. And I would never listen, right? But if you conceptualize and you change the lens at which why you're talking about eating breakfast to the young person and to the parents and reflect it back in terms of their goals, like energy, cognition, sports performance, what have you, we're all more likely to stick to it. Like I'm the worst at taking supplements. If you just tell me to take a supplement, I'm not going to do it,
Mhm.
right? I need like concrete reasons why. And I think that that's how I get through to like the family unit is giving like the reason, not just do it because you have to.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
got to be a more, a why, a how come. Because young people aren't dumb. Like they want to know why. They want a reason why. And I think that that's helpful. But it is hard. And I know why you like stopped with that like pediatric rotation. It's hard. It's almost like a hostage negotiation. You're like, listen, can we at least bring back yogurt into the
Yeah.
house? Please, please.
And I think, I agree with you that I think if everyone understands the reason, I guess I think, we make so many value-based decisions when it comes to parenting, right? Like not all decisions that we make they're not all medical, they're not all logical, right? There's a lot of like value-based decisions in parenting. There's also a lot of value-based decisions when it comes to nutrition. And by value, I think I mean belief, right? I don't mean value like we're not going to eat meat because we value the environment. It's more that like, well, we've always done it this way, therefore, or my mother did it this way, and therefore, or I've read a prominent person's book, and therefore, right? We do make a lot of decisions in nutrition based off of belief and preference, and their value-based decisions are not always that factual,
Mhm,
right? People, you and I are pretty analytical, and if we like present that very factual thing, we're like, yeah, that makes sense. I guess I'll eat that much protein.
mhm,
But it feels like you're contending with a lot more, almost on the same line of like, well, how much screen time do you let your kid have? Do you let them have yogurt? Those feel like those conversations get had in parallel when
right.
really the conversation around nutrition, there's so much more evidence than that. It shouldn't be about how do we feel about yogurt.
Mhm. And and that's so it's such a complex question, and I think that it is a complex answer, which is why that like therapeutic relationship, like we're likely not going to have one visit together. Like it's going to be this like relationship that we develop. Maybe I don't see you for, a year, and then kiddo gets their period or what have you. So we're revisiting the conversation. So I do think it's not something that changes in a one visit thing. It's
Mhm.
like, let's talk about it, let's table it, let's see how we feel, let's work back and forth, like what can you imagine like having in the home. And I think like with nutrition, as you said, I don't think nutrition is complicated. I think it's complex, right? Like when you think about it, it's like there's not too many universal truths with nutrition, right? Influencers will make you think that a goji berry will save your life. It won't, right? Like there's very few universal truths. And so it's not that complicated. It's like fruits and vegetables, fiber, eating enough protein, drinking water. Like there aren't that many universal truths, but it's still complex because you have to take into consideration the family unit, schedules, timing, our beliefs. Like that's where the minutia of nutrition conversation needs to come into play.
And exactly why that sort of 7-minute health appointment every couple years
Yeah.
when you qualify for a physical exam doesn't actually meet those needs, because the devil is in those details as it plays out day to day. Like, what do you think are the most, and I'm a little disconnected from some of those, even though I get lots of target marketing about my acne. I'm a little disconnected from some of the health trends online in that age group. What do you feel like are the most dangerous myths that are circulating right now about for that age group of people?
I would say there's a few. I think one of the big ones is always around bloating. Like your tummy is getting bigger after you eat. You need this, gummy for bloating to make your tummy go flat after you eat. I think that's also targeted to adults as well. And I have to have a lot of real conversations about there's a difference between pathological gas and bloating and what happens to our digestive system after we eat anything, right? And I think that that's such like a common issue is my pants get a little tight after I eat. And I'm like, yeah,
Truth.
true. They do, right? I'm flat when I wake up in the morning, and then I feel like I'm like a little bit bigger like after I eat dinner. It's like, yeah, common, normal. But then it gets to this, like, as I said, predatory nature that we're making something pathological that's very normal. And I would say that's one big trend that I'm seeing online. Like, drink lemon water, apple cider vinegar, like, do all these things to prevent that, like, very normal change in your stomach size and your pants getting tighter after you eat. So I have a lot of conversations around dispelling myths around that with young people. And then I'd say the other one is always dairy. Always, always, always dairy. And that, as you said, stems from our adult women and male patients who wear that dairy-free badge of honor when they come to see us. Like, tell me about your diet. Oh, we're dairy-free, gluten-free, sugar-free, caffeine-free, like all the frees. And then your kiddo is dairy-free as well, right? And so I do think that that dairy-free aspect with, especially with young people who our peak bone mass is reached when we're in our late 20s. So if you're deficient in calcium and vitamin D and protein and all the things we need to accrue bone mass, you likely aren't going to hit that peak bone mass that's genetically programmed for you. And then you're on this like trajectory towards maybe not having peak bone mass as you get older, right? And it's such a shame because when we have these blanket statements online, there's no follow-ups, right? It's like, well, if I go dairy free, what are we pulling away, we're pulling away calories, we're pulling away protein, we're pulling away calcium, we're pulling away all these micronutrients, we're pulling away some fat. But no one is there coaching these young people on what to replace it with, right? And I think that's the nuance of working with someone is what do I do when I take away a food? There's so much that gets taken away when we take away a food, right? And so that was a long-winded answer, but dairy is just it's such a complex food. So when we take it away, so much gets taken away with it. And I think that there needs to be a navigation around it, food sensitivities and it causing bloating and my skin and it being inflammatory and it being fattening and all of these like trigger words that kind of come with dairy. We need to unravel that, and we need to, if we're going to take a food away, we need to do it carefully, and we need to have a reason to do it, because there's not a lot of reasons to restrict food and take foods out of the diet.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're right. Like we don't often talk about that like replacement effect, whether like positive or negative, right? And people will say, oh, I feel so much better since I took a gluten. And I'm like, what were the top gluten sources in your day, right? And they're like, oh, a bagel and I was almost going to say donut, but then I felt like I was going to paint donuts in a negative light. And so I refuse. And then we say, well, what did you put in instead? And they're like, oh, I have a smoothie with berries and protein powder and spinach and flax seeds. And I'm like, okay, those aren't the same, right? Like you took out gluten, but what you put in had a very different nutritional profile, that it wasn't just about the gluten. And so people can artificially feel better when they take foods away because their replacement effect of what they put back in actually was more positive. But the opposite can also be true, where we take out dairy, we put in almond milk. You know, we might as well have said we took out dairy and an incredibly important food and we put in ice cubes.
We put in water.
Yeah, we put in water.
Pale white water.
Expensive pale white water, and we're just going to see how things turn out. Yeah. And if we can frame it in that way, right, we would never say, let's take out like one of North America's top sources of protein, calcium, vitamin D, and calories, and we're going to replace it with water. Right? Like all of a sudden that sounds like that is a problem.
It's a problem. It's a total problem. And I don't think we spell it out in, you know, frank English enough, right? Like I think we think it, but you saying it out loud, I think all of your listeners are going to be like, oh yeah, that doesn't make sense. Right? And it's irresponsible to absorb health information like something as restrictive as taking away that important food group, but then there being no follow-up behind it.
Right. It's totally irresponsible.
It's irresponsible, right? Like let's take away a young menstruator's like main source of calcium, protein, calories, and let's see what happens to their bone health, their menstrual cycle, their mood, their energy, etc. Like it kind of sucks when I hear that happening.
And it could be such a much more empowered conversation, actually, if we decided to take it in that direction. My daughter had to be like dairy-free for quite some, she has like really bad lactose intolerance, which she like thankfully has kind of grown out of, which we celebrated with an ice cream cake from Dairy Queen. But there was a long period of her childhood where she couldn't have any dairy at all. Like it was actually quite remarkable how little was triggering for her digestion. But it became like a negotiation with her around what that needed to look like instead. And not in a punitive way, not like, how dare you have lactose intolerance? You must now do this. But it was like, look, if this can't get in, buddy, this looks like protein powder in your oatmeal. Okay. This looks like, I know you don't love that soy milk. Like it's fortified. You just gonna have to figure out how to do that, because we need to figure out how to get calcium in a different way. Or, you know, this little snack is actually not filling enough. Those pistachios are a non-negotiable, actually. And it gave her some autonomy, right? I'm like, well, you can have pistachios or you can have cashews. That's totally your choice, but you must pick one of them. But there was this follow-up around removing the food group, even though we had like, maybe the only legitimate reason for taking dairy out of someone's diet would be lactose intolerance or a straight up allergy. there had to be some kind of follow-up, right? Because we weren't going to go 10 years of having that food group just not be represented in some way.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing goes with, as we were talking about our pimples, right? Like the same conversation goes around the acne conversation, right? Like, yes, we know that dairy can worsen people's skin, right? But there needs to be this like really close follow-up when we do something like reducing foods like that. And what do we replace it with? But then also working with a practitioner to be like, we're also going to do these other things for your skin so that likely when those parts of your treatment plan, I don't want to say kick in, but start to become efficacious, we can start to reintroduce dairy. Like there needs to be, as you said, like a game plan. We can't just say take it out forever and no follow up with that. That's the irresponsible part, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how much of it has to do, like teens are like relatively resilient,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we always make jokes about like you could like sleep on a coffee table and get up and go work a 15-hour day and eat freezies. And like I'm like transported back to our lifeguarding days when I
Mm-hmm.
think about how like little fuel you could live on, bake out in the sun all day and do that like 97 hours a week.
Yep.
So part of it, like they're quite resilient, but the other side is that there's a lot of side effects of poor nutrition that we also have pegged as being part of the typical teen experience, like being tired all the time or oversleeping or being moody, um, or like and or having difficulty with sleep in some regards. And we've pegged that as like being a part of the typical teenage experience. Like, I don't know if I believe some of that, right? Or if I'm just like, well, what if they like were incredibly well fueled? Can't they just feel great?
Right.
Um, Despite maybe some moodiness or whatever. But like, I'm actually curious whether we've we've ignored that population in some way. One, because they're resilient on one side, but B, we have this expectation that they're not going to be their best self.
Right.
And if that lends us to under supporting them.
I think that's true. Like I do think that one of the biggest like tools that I have is to be able to hear someone's nutritional intake and also their nutritional timing. Like sometimes I don't really care about what exact foods you're eating, but just like the timing of it through the day. And I could spot a problem from a mile away, right? Like I'm sure you do the same where someone's telling you like just the timing of their nutrition and you're like, I can fix 65% of your concerns just by changing your fuel intake. And it's remarkable to see the change in mood, energy, concentration, sports performance, irritability, like all of the things by being like, hey, you don't eat for 6 hours between your lunch at school and after your after school sport. What would it look like if we made some sort of fueling time in between those two pieces? Like it's remarkable what we can change by just fuel timing and not like getting down in the nitty gritty of like which food and what brand and what about this. It's just like just eat food,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that that's very empowering for a young person because it gets the biggest nutritional mistake you can make is just like not eating, right? And I think young people are so bombarded with stuff that I think there's a lot of anxiety and fear about doing nutrition wrong. That
Or the
like
only wrong way to
avoidant
do it is to not do it.
is to not do it. And I think that's not restricted to young people. I think that's an adult problem too.
Yeah, it is an adult problem.
It's an
Absolutely.
adult problem.
Like, okay, so a Baby Bell cheese and crackers, and then like what else? Right? Like, and that's the lunch or that's the snack, and that's the and then the frustration is, oh, I have that mid-afternoon slump.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's like don't be scared of trying something. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. Like you can't F this up, right? We just need to try. Like don't be scared of it. Like the as I say that to all my patients and I feel like they all exhale. Like Oh, I can't F this up. The biggest mistake I can make is just not eating. And and that gives the parents, the young person, so much like self-efficacy, self-autonomy. Like I just need to fuel my system. That's it. Let's start there. And I think like that trickles down to breakfast, right? Like it's always like a war to get a young person to eat breakfast. It's like, please, for the love of God, just eat breakfast before you go to school. And it can be hard, but you don't need to feed your kid like a 3 egg omelet with, a side of whole grain toast with a smoothie. Like they've done studies on literally like cold breakfast cereal and milk, right? Just like simple, like step one, cereal, step two, milk, step three, mix, right? And it improving concentration, mood, energy, like all those pieces. They eat more fiber, they have more calcium, they eat more protein when we just do this like simple breakfast strategy. And there's so much research on eating breakfast, but people run into intermittent fasting online and all of a sudden they think like that's what they need to do. But we ignore this breadth of research on breakfast. I don't know what's up with that.
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it, I think it fits in with what people are already doing. They're like, oh, I'm skipping breakfast. I'm already doing it.
Yeah, great.
I'm doing it and I wasn't even trying. But again, a lot of the claims, because we do like get connected to ideas that feel new and novel, right? Maybe breakfast is going to have its heyday when we're like, hey, do you want to try something new? Have breakfast, because everyone's been fasting for so long. Now breakfast is the weird new
thing.
Yeah.
There's this new concept, eating when you wake up. We'll make millions.
It's funny because my family's moving 10 minutes further from all of our things. And there was a big conversation about breakfast and what that was going to look like and what we needed to do as a family in order to pull this off and to live a little further, and what kinds of breakfasts were going to fit into this new morning routine that we were going to need to have. I think some of those examples that you give people some permission, whether it's adults or the adolescents, that, I still think about my kids' nutrition over a 24-hour window and sometimes over a 3-day window, instead of looking at the minutia of every particular meal. And I think that does some positive things, especially if you're a parent listening, where you're like, okay, breakfast was a granola bar because that was the best I could do. Lunch, they had to buy at school because that was the best I could do. But dinner, right? And it's, doing good where you can do good. I think sometimes where we get stuck with this population is that they are busy and they do live a lot of their lives out of their backpack or on the go or on the bus or what have you. And when our nutrition choices feel like fast food or grab and go meals, we feel like we're making a mistake, right? Oh, they can't have the 3-egg omelet, then I guess we have nothing. When the research is actually, you know what, they probably could just have like a muffin and it would be okay.
Yeah. And I say that to is to zoom out, right? Like that minutia approach to nutrition, to movement. Like we can get so bogged down and like zoomed in on that like one meal or that one day or that long weekend. And that's not the purpose of nutrition and movement. Like you need to imagine being able to do this. Like I'm like, you got to do this forever. Right?
Hopefully
So like to
long
be on that,
time.
it'll be a long time. Like you're gonna be, you got to do this for a long time. So we better figure out how to get comfy with it. And if that's a bit of trial and error, if that's like when it's crazy hockey, soccer, dance drop off day, maybe that day, just like we just got to eat.
Yeah.
You got to eat, right? Just zoom out. And I think that relieves so much stress and anxiety just by doing that. Like I do the same thing with my movement. I know certain days of the week I'm undermoved, I'm sitting on my butt, I'm not doing anything. But when I zoom out over the course of a week, it looks pretty good. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it also brings up this point about how busy young people are, right? And maybe that's like a worthy like other angle to look at, that if, I always say like you're going to eat a peanut butter sandwich in the back of your van one night a week.
Hmm.
If you're doing it five, I feel like we need to renegotiate on where, because it's interesting, like we see this in the menopause data too, that people will hold their health in high regard and have health related goals, and yet it is nowhere in their week.
Hmm.
Right. And so I don't know if we can have both of those things at the same time. I don't know if you can be on three different rep sports teams as an adolescent and hold nutrition and sleep and homework and all of those other values in that same regard. I don't know. Like, I'm curious what you think around, because I don't work with that population. Like, how overscheduled are our young people right now? And how much does that play into this cyclone of poor nutrition?
I think that we almost got an insight into how teens responded partly to COVID isolations, right? Like I think that's an interesting thing that I always like ask my young people is yes, it was hard not seeing my friends, but it was kind of great not going somewhere every single day, right? And having that like reflection, because maybe that's never been reflected back on them before. Like, yeah, I'm a competitive dancer, and it was kind of nice not doing, 7 nights a week at the dance studio. Maybe that's something to reflect on. Do I need to do that group or that solo? Like, do I need to do that? Do I need to be on 3 rep teams? Right. And I do think, like, obviously, our young people really struggle during like isolations, like 3 years from an 11-year-old to a 14-year-old. That's a big, like, developmental shift there, those 3 years. But a lot of them have a lot of insight on what it was like to not be overscheduled. And
Mm-hmm.
we've come across some pretty interesting insights on what it meant to be not overbooked and what that could mean for a huge part. Because we can't, 1 night a week, yes, peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the back seat, sure, no problem. But if that nutrition is starting to edge out eating fruits and vegetables, eating dinner as a family a few nights a week, I think that that's where we need to. I'm not saying it's bad and wrong, but I think we need to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, because I'm happy if, if 6 days a week are fine-ish and there's that one, like we'll call it dumpster fire day. I don't mean that in a judgment way. I mean that in a humorous way, right? Totally fine. But if we want to hold health as the value in our hand and we have a lot of arena time, somehow we're going to have to make those two things meet in the middle. Or your focus on creative, strategic nutrition is going to have to go up. And we can't just be like, well, I wonder what's in the fridge tonight. Oh, nothing I can have in arena. I guess we're out of luck.
Mm-hmm.
Your strategy around nutrition may have to change if your family would like to continue to be as busy as they are, and to let your adolescent or young person meet their nutrition needs.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, like reflecting on, because my son, he was the 11 to 14 when he was during the pandemic, and he developed like a nice relationship with his bed, actually, like meaning that like on an off day now, because he's a competitive skier, when he has an off day, he like sleeps in, he's in his bed, he doesn't want to see anybody. He's like not anti-play date, but he's not like, bugging us either. And I actually feel like part of it was the like he created a homebodiness because he wasn't that before,
Mm-hmm.
just by the product of, realizing like how good he feels after like a rest day. I think that's so insightful.
It's so true. And it like doesn't it kind of hurt your heart to think like these young people don't like they didn't understand the concept of like a rest day,
I know. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Like a mental health day, a rest day,
Yeah.
like
Lie in bed, scroll your phone day, like, and eat your breakfast in bed day. Like, that was
sure.
not a thing. And now he, like, you can tell that he's like, oh, I can do that on Sunday. And he's excited about it.
I love that. Get your people to call my people. We'll reschedule that to when it's better for
That's
me.
right. That's
I
right.
think
It's
that's great.
my,
But I think those like strategies, like we do talk about that in appointments, like what would it look like to buy like fruit and veggie trays? Because then it's like, well, those cost a lot of money. And it's like, well, yeah, we need to pay for strategy, convenience, etc. So, as you said, sometimes two truths can exist at the same time, but sometimes they can't. Right? So,
Yeah.
mhm,
That's right. And I've always loved, and I've said it on the podcast a million times. I like that idea of like operationalizing your values,
mhm,
right? And so if you say that if nutrition's important to your young person, how do they operationalize it? Well, maybe they need to make some decisions with you or for themselves that actually help their nutrition goals. And one of the ways that that plays out in our house is that my kids, my son's like, I don't need to go to health class, mom, because it's like living in health class, living here. Which I
mhm.
wasn't sure if I should take that as a compliment or an insult, but
Not
they
sure.
know if they don't like what's being served, your swap has to be equal or greater nutritional value.
Mhm,
If you don't want a hot dog, cool. It has to look like some turkey slices. If you don't want eggs, fine. It has to be a smoothie, right?
mhm.
Like they have autonomy, but they also have to make a decision that is equal or better nutritional value. They can't trade for less.
Mhm, mhm. Gotta
um,
trade up.
Got to trade up, but it also means our shop needed to change because if we wanted to operationalize them being, taking food to the ski hill or eating breakfast in the car sometimes on the way to school, it meant buying this like expensive protein powder that they actually like
Mhm.
because that is what let that happen,
Yeah. And my
right?
treatment plans with young people are literally like, add this to the grocery list.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if we want this to exist, we want to alter and change the trajectory of our young people's lives by helping them out with their nutrition. Sometimes that needs to happen. The protein powder that's palatable that they like, maybe it costs $3 more a tub, but maybe that's a sacrifice we need to make. I'd almost rather us put resources into assessment and nutrition than be dicking around with like apple cider vinegar gummies or like hair, skin, and nail gummies. Like, no, you know what I mean? Like, where we put our resources matters, and
Did
it's
you just say
important.
dicking around?
I know, I shouldn't have said that. I said it came out of my mouth, and I was like, well,
No,
maybe
it's
that
we
wasn't.
have had it up to here, right? We are not going to be dicking around with gummies. You
Oopsies.
really got it for the gummies today. But I
I
agree with
know.
you. Let's talk a little bit just about that assessment piece because I think, one of the other challenges is working with this population is that they're generally like they are fine,
Mhm,
but they have health needs, and those health needs can't always be met just by turning to their parent and asking them what to do. And
mhm,
that's whether they're 12, whether they're 17, whether they're 25. And them having a cheerleader, coach, someone in their corner makes an incredible difference to their health trajectory.
mhm.
Um, how do you choose the right practitioner, knowing that our goals are for them to develop these like lifelong skills and not be afraid of food? And like, how does someone even go about doing that aside from them choosing you? Because
I
obviously
mean,
that's
that's
like
an
the
easy way
choice.
to go about it.
But we have lots of listeners that are out of
Of
jurisdiction.
course.
For us, we can
Mhm.
only support people in Ontario. People that are out of jurisdiction ask us all the time, like, how do I find a practitioner? Like, what are your thoughts around that age group specifically?
So, and that should be like a there should be strategy around choosing a practitioner, right? You're not giving your young person to the practitioner, but you're trusting someone to be part of your family's team, right? So I do think there needs to be a bit of due diligence when you're choosing a practitioner. My biggest piece is what is the practitioner's feeling around nutrition? What's their nutritional strategy? Do they come from a place of food sensitivity testing, taking away foods, take away, it's a food sensitivity, take it away? Or do they come from a place of non restriction, um, intuitive eating? Is that a place they come from? And a practitioner should be able to very quickly answer if they, which school of thought they come from. Because really, in our young people, it's not helpful for our older patients either, restriction, but especially with our young people, there can be no place with that restrictive language. And I think that you need to have someone who is also very well versed in disordered eating and eating disorders to be able to spot that from a mile away, and then being cognizant around not cultivating language that could lead to avoidant restrictive behaviors with young people. So I don't know if there's like a screening checklist to find a practitioner, but that's sort of like the language and the vibe you should be looking for. Recognition around disordered eating and coming from a place of non-restriction with food.
I think that's good because it helps give people some of those like, red flag spidey senses if
Mm-hmm.
those are going off. I would say if I was going to add to that list, I would say some of those cookie cutter type approaches, like first we do this and then we do this and then
Mm-hmm.
we do this. Like, I don't know how they know that before they've met everybody. Right? Like that
Right.
to me is a bit of a turnoff because it means there's a bit more of this, like I'll call it like a dogmatic approach
Mm-hmm.
of working with people. Like first we fix your hormones and then we fix your digestion. I don't even know what that means.
What does that mean, right?
I don't know. And when people work with us, we're really clear that it's process oriented and it probably takes multiple appointments. And
Mm-hmm.
we actually don't even want to onboard patients if they're not open to looking at their health over a frame, like over a period of time. But it's not because we do, this special detox in week 1 and this special something or other in week 4.
Mm-hmm.
It's because the conversations around the details is where the magic happens. So I would throw that in there as maybe one of those other red flags. And testing. Like I think you send lots of young people for very basic health assessment, blood testing, a lot around iron deficiency, vitamin D deficiency. Can you speak to the sort of unusual testing methods? Just to help us finish up that conversation on how to pick a practitioner.
Sure. So I would be wary around practitioners who are pushing tests like food sensitivity testing um, or like hormone urine testing, like things like that, and are not founded in strong evidence. And especially with food sensitivity testing, or like, what's that test where it's like almost like a stool sample where they like just tell you a big list of foods that are just like those like stool sample tests where it like basically spits out what you're sensitive to food wise. A lot of those tests are not founded in strong research. And I would be very wary of choosing a practitioner who like needs those tests run to work with them. Because what happens, you get a big list of can eat, and that's really harmful to any person's brain when it comes to food. It's like, I'm scared of this food. I can't eat this food. Well, it says I'm not allowed to eat that food. So being wary of those kind of like specialized tests when we haven't even checked the young person's like iron status.
And they don't eat breakfast.
And they don't eat breakfast. It's like shelling out hundreds, thousands of dollars in this assessment piece that's not founded, but your young person is iron deficient, vitamin D deficient, and they're not eating breakfast and they're under fueling through the day. Like that's where evidence should be pointing us towards, is starting there, not over here.
Yeah, like you're a young person, and if you are a young person, they are special, but they also probably need like the absolute basics to get started on feeling better. And not these like special
They need
fancy.
like,
Yeah,
yep, they
exactly.
need the $10 ferritin test. They don't need the $1,000 mail us your stool and we'll tell you the 400 foods that they can't eat. Like that's likely not even close to what your young person needs. And I really urge you to reconsider if that's a route you're considering going down.
Well, and it's funny because I think, when we talk about like the value of being of strategy and a coach and a doctor, like in your corner, part of that return on investment is to have this like, the straight and narrow path on getting better and not being distracted by a lot of the marketing and things that are predatory. Circle back to the first 5 minutes. Because they're often not needed, right? It's funny. Like I always think, yes, it's an investment, especially for parents to have their young person work with a practitioner, but the cost of like not doing it in a lot of cases ends up being exponential because we either go down these paths of supplements and gummies and things to try and support our young person, or at worst, their quality of life and the cost of like, them not being able to show up as their full, beautiful selves, that a couple of hours working with someone on how to fuel themselves during the most critical developmental window of their lives. Like, I can't think of a better ROI.
Absolutely. It's like, is your young person missing, you know, soccer practice because they have headaches and they're dropping out of sports because they have menstrual cramps? It's just like there's such a breadth of great research on how to support your kids at this time. You don't need to be, you know, online searching like how to fix or help your kid. Like you don't need to be all things to your kid. That's a lot to take on. And outsourcing that piece to someone knowledgeable who you trust is like, oh, thank you. Because I have that. I love when my patients come in with their parent and they pull out their phone, their notes, and they are like, we have 10 questions for you, Dr. Erin, that we came up with over the past month, right? That we like filtered through online or a friend was talking about or another parent asked about. We took it out of our brains, put it in a note, and we're like, Dr. Erin's going to tell us what to do when we see them, right? Or they develop this self-efficacy where it's like, we knew that that was BS. And they learn how to spot crap from a mile away. And I love being that person for families. I think that that's such like my secret sauce is like, it's so great. And I love seeing that.
Yeah, the work that you do with our patients and our patients' young people, right? Because you see a lot of the youth of the adults that I work with is brilliant. It was making me think of when you said, you don't need to be all things to your kid, right? I think that's such a nice pressure to be able to put down as a parent, right? It's not like, it's like, here, sign your child's birth certificate, and here's your master's in nutrition. Here's your PhD in psychology. Here is your master's in calculus. Hang on to that one. You're going to need it when they hit grade 8. Like, I missed the French one. I don't know where my French diploma is.
You lost
After I
that
gave
one.
birth, I'm missing it. I said to my yesterday, quick story. So he had to work on some French. And then I was like going down the stairs and he was like, I don't know how to do something. I'm like, okay, 1 second. I'll be right there. And we can YouTube it together.
That's so funny.
That's where we're at with the French.
That's where we're at.
That's where we're at. But if there's professionals that can support you, then maybe you don't need to YouTube it. And I do think that that's such a lovely thing to be able to put down, right? That carrying around that responsibility of fueling another person is really significant. And that lack of guidance that we have is really like, it's almost not fair, right? That we hold and carry around as parents this like massive responsibility for having to take care of our kids on that level. And we struggle to make decisions about nutrition. We are the victim of that target marketing that maybe is going to influence how we feel about a particular food group. We weren't taught, right? The modeling we had about diet culture and weight and stigma and all of that, like we have enough time trying to figure out ourselves, let alone trying to figure out what the next step is for our kids, that I'm so grateful that we had the chance to connect to Erin and to be able to show our patients and our audience what that actually looks like. So before we go, Erin, I would love if you could share how our listeners could connect with you, what their next steps should be. I'm sure we've left them with lots of questions after today, and how they can work with you.
Yeah, I'm at Clarity Health with Dr. Jordan in Burlington. So I accept residents of Ontario. So whether it would be easier to see me virtually or in person in Burlington. I also am active on social media, Dr. Erin ND, DRERINND. If you want to kind of filter through my vibe and what I put out into the universe, I'd love to see you and your young person over on Instagram as well.
Amazing. And we'll put links to all of those things in the show notes so you can jump right over there. Erin is one of my favorite social media follows, which, she works like one room over, or I guess one room below me. And so it's funny that how much I creep her stuff on social media because she's literally right there. Although there's so many work days that you and I don't actually see each other, even though we're in the same building.
100%. Yeah, you were lurking across outside of my door the other day, and I could just like kind of hear you, and I was just like, Jordan, hi.
Yeah, I know. We just didn't connect. But it speaks, I mean, I'm always grateful for those days because it means we've impacted a lot of people. If you and I are like, these ships passing in the hallway.
Yeah.
Thanks for spending time with me today, Erin. And we'll put all those links for how our listeners can get better connected with the work that you do. That's some of the things that your work with that adolescent group is one of the things I'm the most proud of that we do at Clarity Health. And so I always make it part of my interest and mission to expose our older audience and listeners to the impact that young people can have if they have the right person in their corner, and that person is you.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate you giving a bit of a platform for our younger people too, because they've been a bit underrepresented. So I'm excited to potentially be a practitioner and maybe you never even thought about having an ND on your kids' healthcare team. So it's very exciting to start to see that start to open up.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.